Welcome to the greatest podcast of all time, relative to. Oh boy, not starting off great. Relative Talk with your host John LaLoja, my guest Theresa Young, formerly Theresa LaLoja, my sister. Theresa, how you doing?
I'm doing great. You're giving me all kinds of news today. This is great.
Yeah, we're just talking some of our issuing our family laundry, but basically talking about how we finally found a nanny and we were really excited about it, but my mom mostly pumped about it. But that's not why we're here. We're here to discuss
Should we
Real Time with Bill Maher.
devote the podcast to Mom instead?
I mean, it's futile because she won't listen. But yeah, this podcast is dedicated to Mom and Barack Obama, and Jesus. Throw him in there. So,
all equal chance of listening.
Two good episodes. Again, do you want to start Bill Maher or you want to start Daily Show? Because we have limited time because your kids are going to come home in like 25 minutes. Which show do you want to start with?
Your call.
You don't care? Okay. I don't have a ton of notes with Jon Stewart. I have more with Bill Maher. So let's start with Jon Stewart. I sent you all this, but I wanted to, just for the viewers. So Yahoo Entertainment posted this about 4 days ago. Jon Stewart returned to The Daily Show, obviously we know. His return also scored a 0.62 rating among adults 25 to 54, you and me, the highest rated telecast since 2017, and secured the biggest share The Daily Show has ever delivered, or has delivered since 2015. So obviously 1.85 million viewers, biggest audience in 5 years. Not a coincidence. Again, so the latest show that he did, again, he crushed it. Trees, he's so good at this thing, you know? Like he's just a natural at it. He knows the cadence, he knows the jokes. After a clip plays, he'll let it sink in with the facial expression, and he'll wait just enough, and then he'll come in and he'll let the audience he'll let the audience discover the joke themselves, and then he's got a great tag after it. Like some of the best moments of The Daily Show are his facial expressions post clips. Don't you agree?
Yeah, he's hilarious. His faces are the best part of the show. And I thought it was interesting, he got some backlash, like from some pretty prominent Democratic people saying,
he touched on that to begin the episode.
Right. Surprised that he'd go after Biden or whatever. And I was just looking at it, thinking, like, as someone who had watched that show for years, anybody who's surprised about his monologue or his jokes or anything towards Biden, it's almost
never watched the show before.
Yeah. That is right down the alley. He would have gone down before. I mean, he would make fun of Obama. Just like any comedian, you would make fun of someone who's in power, particularly someone who's serving up as many softballs as Joe Biden is. Whether or not you agree with him politically, that's not the point. He's a comedian, and to not talk about it would be disingenuous and totally opposite of his whole thing.
100%. I remember him interviewing Obama. Obama eventually came on the show. This is after he won his second term, and they were rolling out healthcare.gov. Remember the whole issue with the website, how it was breaking? Stewart just went after him. He was like, this is the best you can do? Like, your shitty Wi-Fi, like your IT people at the White House, like this is like right. You were not prepared for this. Like, and going at him, and he's like, well, it's very, very complicated. Yeah, it was right to his face in person.
And right I think it's so clear. It's so clear that he hasn't changed. What's changed is
the culture has shifted too.
Right.
As much as
People,
as much as I get annoyed with Bill Maher saying I haven't changed, the left changed, like he does have a point. Like the culture definitely shifted, and you saw that with the backlash with the Daily Show. Like that show is that he's done that he did last week or yesterday or on Monday was no different than what he was doing in 2012, 2013, 2011.
Democrat,
Same
Republican,
stuff.
it doesn't matter. I mean, I could see why people think it
He's
has.
looking for the comedy. Yeah, he's mining for comedy. Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. Regardless of what people say, like it just doesn't matter. He's looking for the comedy, and he killed Biden in the first episode, and he should have. Biden is struggling, and that's putting it lightly.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Oh, okay.
yeah, go ahead.
No, just
Go ahead.
yeah. I was just gonna say the same thing. Yeah, whether it's Democrat, Republican, he goes after both, and it's just the audience is now so it's such a rarity for the audience to hear anything opposite of their own echo chamber, and that it kind of actually brings me to Bill Maher's episode because I think one of the best things about his show, and one of the reasons I like his show so much, is because he is one of the few, at least one of the few shows I watch that truly brings on both sides. I mean, you don't get more right wing than Ann Coulter, and she is
Van Jones and Ann Coulter. Yeah.
I mean, she is a very, very polarizing figure, and
Oh my
he has
God, absolutely.
right, and he has her on, and you are, she's allowed to speak, he's allowed to speak, and then the audience can, in a calm and civil way, hear both sides and decide for themselves. I think that's such a rarity, and I mean, people can't even handle it when Jon Stewart does it in a comedic way. It just has shifted so far.
I think it's a good thing. Like Stewart has sort of carte blanche. Like he's such a trusted source that when he rips Biden, I was like, whoa! Like even the first episode coming right out of the gate, and he got huge laughs, and that's because the audience recognizes you can't. That video doesn't lie. Like you know what I mean?
Right.
He's just what did he said? That goes back to the one of the jokes he said. He goes, "I apologize for seeing what my eyes saw and what my brain thinks, and then came out of my mouth. Like,
Yeah.
sorry, you know."
And by the way, everyone else was too. Whether you agree with
Absolutely,
it or
yeah.
not, it's not even about that. It's just that's just what's happening right now. Like that's just the truth.
Of
Whether or not
course.
you be a good president, like you can't deny. It's like on the first episode when he like the part about where he does the press conference and then he's like, "Great, that's great," and then he like comes back and they're like, "No," I mean that is so what everybody was thinking. All the people who support him the most were thinking.
100%. And then he does that series of clips where it's got left wing pundits and even Kamala Harris saying he is so on top of things and organized and whatever, and he's commanding this room. And then they cut back to Stewart and he goes, do we have that clip? Because if we do, I'd love to see that. Like, do we have that clip? So it was just brilliant. So again, he addressed the Democratic criticism from like Marielle Trump and Keith Olbermann. One great joke I thought was just absolutely perfect. It's a play on the Washington Post whose tagline is "Democracy dies in darkness" or whatever. And he goes, "I guess democracy dies in discussion." Like.
Yeah.
It's not left or right. We're just having a conversation and we're seeing with our own eyes. And that's what the great thing about the Daily Show is. Like the video doesn't lie. You know what I mean? Like it's right there. He said this about Trump years ago. He goes, Trump thinks he's being real slick and cool and thinks he's getting away with all this stuff. He goes, but what he doesn't realize is that it's all being recorded. On video, on record. So years later, historians would be like, there's no way that happened. And then he could be like, here's Here's that clip right here. Here's where he said it. You're like, there's no way he said, find me 11,000 votes. Here it is. Here's that clip. Here it is.
Right.
Oh, here he is on video saying, this. Like, there's video evidence that is incontrovertible.
Watching both of them, especially when they do montages like that, it always reminds me of, and I don't know where I heard this quote, but it was from someone in politics who worked in politics, and he said it's so much more like Veep than like House of Cards, rather than it being all of this like sophisticated back room under the table, inside dealing. It's really a lot more like, oh, someone booked the wrong 4 seasons. Like, it's so much more like what happens on Veep. And every time I see them like that, I see like their staff in the back room going, God, no, like, don't do it.
Jon Stewart was doing an interview with Farhid Zakaria, I believe, on CNN. And he was talking. He goes, this country is held together by really good young legislative aides that are doing all of the hard work. He goes, if you've been down to Congress, he goes, it's like an assisted living facility over there. He goes, this country is being held together with glue and, paper cement by young, like, legislative aides who are trying to do the right thing and propping up their leaders to do the right thing, who are like falling asleep on them. I just thought that was so funny and smart.
And that's one reason I think people still have faith in Biden, or rather his administration. I think a lot of people think while he personally may not be up to the task, I think some people trust the people he would surround himself with, who, to your point, are probably doing the bulk of the work. Whereas people don't necessarily trust Trump's choices in that manner.
Right. They're not voting for Biden. They're voting for the administration and everything that he stands for.
Right.
Because as a candidate, he's not great at all. Oh my God, he's not great.
What if they have a debate?
By the way, Mom gets surprised. Mom gets upset when I do that. When I criticize Biden,
do what?
like when I criticize Biden, she like gets upset about that. I'm like, Mom, I go, I'm not saying, Trump's like terrible, but like Biden is a terrible candidate. He is my, like, not my first choice, not my 100th choice. He's terrible. He can't put 4 words together. And she gets like upset about that. But that sort of speaks to like, you can't criticize, even if you're a Democrat, you can't criticize the candidate. Like, you got to call a spade a spade. And I think that's what Stewart's great at, and that's why it's so good. So let's get to the Tucker.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I was going to move on to Tucker Carlson thing, but make your point.
It's the same point. Just like, that's what's great about both shows. And like I was saying about Bill Maher, because he will bring on both sides. And you can think either one of them, Van Jones or Ann Coulter's crazy, but you can also pull out like, well, I agree with. I just don't think people give the audience enough credit. Give them both sides. They can hear what she says and be like, well, I don't agree with that, but I do agree with this, or I agree with parts of what both of them said, but I think they're missing a critical third piece. Like, people can do that. They're just not. That's not provided very often in our media.
Absolutely. Well, he said. Bill Maher said Kellyanne Conway on his show so many times, going back to his ABC show, Politically Incorrect, and say what you want about her, but but like, she's whip smart, she's fascinating to listen to, whether it's the truth or not. She's very, very good at her job, and some things that she says, like, I remember one time she said something, I was like, I was a little scared. I was like, that's a pretty good point. That's not a bad point, even though I'm not a fan, but I'm just glad that he has people on both sides to do that. So, all right, let's get into the Tucker Carlson bit, because this was so good on The Daily Show. So Tucker Carlson goes to Moscow to interview Putin, and he's basically trying to say that Russia is better than the United States, and he goes to the grocery store and he gets a cart and he puts a ruble in there. He goes, oh, 10 rubles. He goes, oh, so I see. It's not free because to get your ruble back, you have to put your cart on the rack at the end. So it's an incentive, and it's not like some handout or whatever.
Well, it's not. No, he said it's not like you can take.
It offers an incentive
for it to be homeless, or what he said, something like take it to your homeless encampment or something.
Yeah, and then it goes back to Stewart, and he goes, "I know I've said it before, but that guy, he's such a dick."
Yeah.
Oh, and so he's interviewing Putin. He's throwing him softball questions. It's really embarrassing. At the moment of zen at the end is Putin talking to another Russian journalist, and he basically divulges like how bullshit this interview was and how there weren't even real questions. It was just a bunch of softball questions. So Stewart's like, all right, this is a guy I got to learn from. All right, I'm going to take notes. Pulls out his pad and paper, and he cuts to Tucker Carlson. He goes, why are we doing this? Well, we do real journalism. Cuts back to Stewart, and he goes, lie about what you do. and then Putin was talking about like Hitler. I can't remember the context of which, but
he was saying that he was saying Putin was making the point that it was Poland's fault they were invaded by the Nazis.
Exactly. Yes. He goes, oh, and then it comes back to Stewart. He goes, oh, yes, Poland's fault. And then he said, and then they cut to Tucker's face, and Tucker was just like, And he goes, oh, of course.
Right.
And he goes, Tucker, what do you do to your face when interviewing Putin and not pressing him on anything? He goes, it looks like you're constipated while jerking off to a Sears catalog. Just perfect. Just absolutely perfect. Another one of my favorite jokes.
I really liked the line. I thought the best part, the way Stewart summed it up the best, because he concedes the point about like, yes, this is a beautiful train station, and then he talks about what the subway in New York looks like.
He's like, wow, this guy really likes trains.
Right. And he's like, yeah, that's a beautiful train station. He's like, but I'll trade you your chandeliers for I think he calls the New York subway like the urinal cake subway.
Yeah.
He said, but for the actual literal price of liberty.
Right.
And then
he goes, unfortunately, Putin is a very dangerous dictator,
Right. And he brings up the example of Alexei Navalny, which like just coincided with that. And he's kind of like, yeah, take your pick.
Yeah. That's about all. We were short on time, so I'm going to get to Maher. Correspondent bit was with Michael Costa. It's fine. He was like supposed to be in North Korea at like a candy shop. And then the interview was just a couple of lawyers talking about Trump. So nothing groundbreaking, but I just want to touch on the monologue. Okay. Real Time with Bill Maher. Monologue. Clearly displeased with some of his monologue jokes. Joe Biden TikTok jokes were not going well. And so like this started like kind of a fractious relationship with the audience. As you know, he gets very offended if people don't laugh at him. And I'll get to one, I think, which is new rules, the Afghanistan one with the we'll get to that.
I blame this on you, Ann.
yeah, that was great. Like blaming Ann Coulter for a joke that he wrote that bombed. Yeah. We'll get to there.
Because he's a bad audience.
Yeah. So one of my favorite jokes in the monologue, he said, he goes, with all the so he's talking about Trump. He goes, with all the primaries he's running in and his 4 trials going at the same time, Trump had to do his makeup in the car, which I thought was great. And his guest was really interesting. You are a psychologist. So his guest interview was Jean Twenge, a PhD psychologist from San Diego State, I think. And she talks about the different generations. Her book is called Generations. And it starts with the silent generation in Joe Biden, for example, someone who was born 1925 to 1945, then the boomers, 1950s, which is Bill Maher. So like TV, birth control, some of this stuff. And then Gen X, millennials, which you and I are, Gen Z, and then even below Gen Z, tweens/polars who were born in 2013.
Most people call them Gen Alpha.
Gen Alpha? Okay.
That's what most people call them. She even said that, but she like made up her own name for them. But like for polars. anyone else would know it as Gen Alpha.
Gen Alpha. Okay. So
that's like my kid.
Okay, so born in 2013. Well, yeah, Elliot, because Elliot was born in 2014. Close. So she was talking about each generation thinks the next one is softer, and it's really technology has an enormous effect on each generation, thus informing who they are. So she talks about old school, like focusing on major events, like how old were you when 9/11 happened, the Vietnam War, did it have an effect on your values long term? But she goes, but that's like old way thinking. But what she was saying in her book in Generations, and this is why Bill Maher had her on, because he's been talking about this a lot, is technology. That's what really informs people and generations. And Bill Maher talked about it. He's like, I'm a boomer, 1950s, TV. He's like that. That's why I wanted to be a comedian. That's who I first saw comedians on television. And I was like, wow, I can't believe this is a thing. But she makes an interesting point. She goes, new school tech leads to individualism, not just smartphones and social media, but also the washing machine and faster transportation and better medical care and birth control. And she talks about, have you heard of the slow life strategy that she talks about?
No.
So it's the developmental trajectory. The developmental trajectory slows down because we live longer. Healthcare is better. Education takes longer to finish. Therefore, teens are less independent, i.e. the stuff that Bill Maher has been slamming young kids, like don't drink alcohol, not gauging in, you're not going on dates or premarital sex, or don't even have a driver's license, etc. So they're not being independent. And he cited this statistic, which I thought was crazy, although sadly I'm not surprised. He goes, with TikTok and social media, he goes, tweens or polars or Gen Alpha, as you call it, don't buy or read. He goes, a poll showed that only 12% of them read books, like a book each year. And they spend 5 hours. Yeah, and they spend 5 hours a day on social media. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Does that make sense from a psychologist view and what you've seen from your life interacting with kids?
Yeah, and more than that, I think it just has to do so much with attention span. Like if you like what TikTok does to a kid's brain is.
And by the way, we love TikTok. That algorithm is pretty incredible.
A well-curated TikTok profile could tell me everything I need to know about you in 10 minutes. But it's not to bash the app itself. It's just to talk about kind of the way entertainment in the world is heading, like what that does to a kid's brain, where it is like dopamine hit, and it's quick and in such quick succession. And then you think about a kid going back to, which our schools, as much as technology's incorporated in schools, it's still a very traditional model. You still sit down and look up at a human person talking to you, and consider like the entertainment ratio to what actually happens in a classroom and working in schools. It is the most drastic difference, I think. Just the way we teach, the whole school model is going to have to completely change to keep up with technology, especially with, like she said, with these kids spending hours and hours and hours on technology. And we should say they shouldn't, and that we should, try to encourage other things. And that's great, and we should, but we should also look at the reality of
reality, right?
Yeah, they're used to getting, entertained every few seconds. Something has to change in the way we do things in schools, because it's just going to be two worlds. It's going to be like speaking another language.
Yeah, I was talking. So I do social media for a living, and I stress the algorithm all the time. I tell stakeholders and leadership about social media strategy. I go, you know, we have other competitors within our vocation and in our sector. Um, but for social media, what you're really competing with, you're competing with cat videos. But ultimately, what you're competing with is the algorithm. The These social media platforms are monetized by eating up engaging content. So if anything comes into your feed, there's already a ton of engagement on it. There's a reason for that. You don't get stuff that doesn't get engagement. So you need to feed that machine so your stuff gets dispersed in various other platforms, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, whatever, TikTok. It has to be engaging content. And what's happening is Google search, people like Googling things and searching for things. TikTok is cutting into Google search for Gen Z and lower, but cutting in by 40% because kids don't want to read. They want to swipe and see, like, do I like this product? Do I like this product? No one wants to like type or read anything.
It's cutting
I
into
wrote
same thing.
I wrote a book. I wrote a book a couple years ago. I don't know if you noticed. I think I've pitched it 1,000 times on this podcast, but I feel like a blacksmith now. Like how old school it is to like write a book. Like no one reads anymore. So they don't want to. Not only do they not want to search in Google, they don't want to even search for the results and even click and decipher what works for them. They want to just swipe. They want to be like, no, no, no. And the other thing too, some of that's misleading because you may have a good product, but the person promoting it, they may not like their face. So they'll swipe. It's 8 milliseconds. That's what I tell people all the time at work. I'm like, they're like, they're worried about some semicolon in the right place. I'm like, your audience doesn't care. Like I'm telling you, like whether this is good or bad for society is up for debate, but I'm telling you the realities. I spent I spent 8 hours in the headquarters of Facebook in Chicago one time for a seminar. One day was before the click, one day was after the click. It was all about reducing friction within the customer journey for marketing. And they talked for 8 hours, Teresa, about stopping the scroll. What makes someone stop the scroll? And what you realize is Facebook is not a social media company or Meta, whatever you want to call it. It's a behavioral science company. They have so much data on the human psyche that there are certain colors that people are more apt to stop on. Like the Fire Festival, that documentary, they use the color orange. They did that on purpose because they know that, and psychologically, that is a unique color that you don't often see. And it was just a blank square orange, and it got a ton of engagement because people stopped. So I think it's absolutely fascinating. One interesting thing he said for millennials, you and us, you and myself, doing better economically, they will eventually catch up to Gen Z or Gen X and Boomers, but certainly took way longer, from the recession from '08, like way longer.
That's also
Panel get
on the economy continuing to do as well as it's doing right now because they're not
Of
there
course,
yet
of course,
in mass. They're
right?
not yet. So that economy has to keep kicking like it is for that to happen. Not that it won't, but it's not like
Correct.
everybody's even.
Correct. So the panel guests were as polar opposite as you can get: Van Jones and Ann Coulter. I like Van Jones. I think he's a little full of himself. Ann Coulter, yikes, is pretty right wing. But they talked about the gun violence at the Chiefs Super Bowl parade. In Missouri law, and I lived in Missouri or right on the border for a couple years, so none of this surprises me. No permit is required to concealed carry. No ban on assault weapons. No mental health restrictions. Van Jones was like the NRA owns members of Congress, and something he said, which was really interesting, was, "Are your kids home?"
Yeah.
Oh. He said there's a suicide crisis among white kids and a homicide crisis among black kids, which I thought was really interesting. And then Ann Coulter, said the illegitimacy rate, lack of a father among the black community, is the recent crime rates are higher for them amongst whites. Like, did Bill Maher agree with that?
I don't think that's what she said. I think what she was saying is she was aligning that to the main issue with what you see with like black homicide. And she was saying if you control for that factor, then black and white crime rates look similar. She was saying that is like the determinant factor, and I think they were both disagreeing with her. I think Bill Maher said he believes it's part of the picture. Because I heard him say I agree with you. So I think he believes it's part of the picture, but I don't think either one agreed that it was like the single determinant factor.
Yeah. Do you think they were good guests?
Yeah, I think they were good guests just because it's such a rarity to genuinely see two sides like that. Like I said,
they let each other talk. They let each other talk.
They were calm. There was no histrionics. There's no performative like that. I just have no stomach for. But I mean, they couldn't probably have disagreed with each other more, but they just let each other talk and you let the audience decide. I think that's the strength of it.
Yes. I totally agree. His Kennedy comedy bit was not great.
Actually, I thought it was kind of harsh. It didn't hit well with me.
Not funny.
He's kind of joking about like a lot of tragic deaths, and I know it was like a long time ago. And I know a lot of the audience may not even be aware, but I don't know. It came off a little harsh to me.
Yeah, I agree. Not funny. That's why I literally wrote Kennedy comedy bit. Not great.
Yeah.
So that, and then he did new rules. So he makes a joke about, like, first of all, the monologue didn't go like he wanted. And he is very temperamental. And if you do not laugh at his jokes, he gets very offended. And he will lash out at the crowd. Mm-hmm. And so he's doing a joke, some Afghanistan joke, and it bombs. And he gets really upset and he blames the crowd. He goes, weird crowd. And then he blamed it on Ann Coulter. She's just like, what?
It's like, not my show.
Isn't he embarrassed? Do you think his staff goes in and it's like, hey, Bill, like, it's such a bad look. Like, why do you do that? It's embarrassing.
I think he
looks like a little baby.
I think he just does what he wants to do. You can say hi. Want to say hi to Uncle John? What?
Hi, Peanut.
15. Uncle John, check it out.
You're a genius, Soph.
I am.
I miss you.
You can put your backpack over. Remember to get me a Packers jersey.
I will get you a Packers jersey when I can see you in person, face to face. When I'm not in quarantine anymore.
Put that over there. Take your shoes off.
This is the last thing I'll say. Can your kids hear this?
Yes, they can hear you.
It's a really funny joke that I heard on Overtime, but I don't want them to hear it.
Clean it up.
I can't. It won't work. Like I can't say it. Did you see the agenda that I wrote you?
No.
That I emailed you? It was the best joke, but it was on Overtime. I'm not going to do it because
Why
Soph
can you
is
not
here.
show me?
Because you are little and brilliant and beautiful.
I'm little? Oh no, I'm bigger.
Okay, go for it.
All right, we can wrap it up.
Okay.
I won't do the joke because your children are there.
Okay.
Thank you so much for listening to our pod. Please join us next week. We usually do it every Tuesday. I had to back it up this Wednesday because we have lives and kids and work and other things. Theresa, thank you so much for joining me, and we'll see you next week on the next episode of Relative Talk. Thank you.
God, don't leave.